that President Xi has decided to contribute 1.5 billion renminbi towards the biodiversity challenge, And here I must say that the tragedy about China is that quite often on global challenges, China is making a lot of contributions, but China is not very good at marketing its contributions. The world doesn't know what China is doing. And I'll give you 3 or 4 concrete examples, Henry, to prove my point. Firstly, China is the first country in the world to speak about the concept of ecological civilization, which means that as you modernize and develop, you must take care of your environment also, right? Now, nobody has heard of ecological civilization. And this is a tragedy. Here is China committing itself to be the first civilization, committing itself to developing an ecological civilization, and nobody knows about it. Secondly, if you look in terms of why climate change is happening now, it's not just happening because of the new flows of greenhouse gas emissions from China, India, and the rest of Asia. It's also happening because of the stock of greenhouse gas emissions that the Western industrialized countries have put in there since the Western Industrial Revolution over 100, 200 years ago. So again, that's something that most people in the world are not aware of, right? Nobody knows about it. In fact, I wrote an article called Climate Justice, and I published it in the Singapore Straits Times, and I'm happy to send you a copy for you to share with your readers, pointing that out. And then thirdly, China has done so much in terms of reforestation, right? I mean, it's reforested an area the size of Belgium or bigger in China. And again, nobody knows about it. No one knows about it. And then you make the other contributions you made, for example, I understand that when President Xi Jinping decided that there'd be no more shark's fin served in meals produced by the Chinese Communist Party, the price of shark's fin dropped and lots of sharks were saved in the world, right? And again, all these things that China has done in a concrete fashion, no one knows about. Nobody knows these facts, which is actually quite shocking and quite stunning. So this is why it's very important for China to make a bigger effort to try and explain to the rest of the world what it is doing. And I think it's important to make sure that this message is conveyed not necessarily by spokesmen of China, but by friends of China around the world. I mean, and all they shouldn't what's the word for it? They shouldn't deploy Chinese propaganda. Mm-hmm. They should just tell the facts. That's the scientific facts of what China has contributed. And certainly, I give you another big example, right? If China had decided that it would produce the same number of gasoline cars as United States, that would have been terrible for climate change. But China is now the leader in producing electric cars. And electric cars will help to save the global environment. And China is a leading supplier of solar power or of wind turbines energy. Again, the world doesn't know all these facts. So I think it's important for China to look for friends who can explain. As again I said, it's not propaganda.
Yes.
Just state the facts. Just give the facts and let the facts speak for themselves. And that's something that China has not been very good at doing so far. And that's why there's so much negative coverage of China in the Anglo-Saxon media. Why global cooperation is important. And, I wrote a book on global governance called The Great Convergence, which actually has been published in China also. And in that book, I explain that the globalization has shrunk the world. And as a result of shrinking the world has changed fundamentally. And to explain how it has changed fundamentally, I have used the analogy of what I call a boat analogy. So in the past, when 7.8 billion people live in 193 separate countries, it was as though they were living in 193 separate boats. And each boat had a captain or crew to take care of it. And the boats were separate. So if one boat got COVID-19, then another boat would not get COVID-19 because they're on a different boat, right? COVID-19 cannot go from one boat to another boat, right? But the world has shrunk. And now the 7.8 billion people, when they live in 193 separate countries, they're no longer living in 193 separate boats. They're living in 193 separate cabins on the same boat. And if you had any doubts about it, COVID-19 showed it. COVID-19 began in one cabin, maybe it began in China, and it spread around the world, right? Clearly. So it shows that we are all of us on the same boat. So if you're on the same boat, we should take care of our common boat. And we now know, frankly, that if we destroy planet Earth, we have no alternative, right? If we destroy the environment, the climate, the atmosphere of planet Earth, and we have we cannot go and live in any other planet. We cannot transport 7.8 billion people to Mars or anywhere. And Mars is not inhabitable anyway, maybe except for Elon Musk, maybe he can go and build a small colony for himself there. But humanity cannot go and live in those places. So it's important for us to understand that we are now on the same boat and that we have a common destiny and we have common challenges. But this requires a complete change in mindset on the part of the policymakers. But the problem here is that especially many of the Western policymakers, their concepts of geopolitics come from the 19th century. And when I talk about the structural forces that explain why the US-China geopolitical contest is continuing, is because they're applying 19th century geopolitical concepts to the 21st century. Because in the past, when you live in separate countries, it's as though you're living in separate boats. Now all of us live on the same boat. So our common interests and common challenges are much more important